Hey everyone! Thank you for showing up for this newly renovated episode of Magecast, the critically long-form analytical show featuring magical guests talking about the games. I want to thank everyone who took the time to take our Magecast survey. I took a lot of the feedback to heart and have begun to make some changes to the show that I hope you'll enjoy, one of them being this unique intro I'll be recording special for each episode. You can find the survey on our site, thewellreadmage.com, if you'd like to leave us more feedback. I also want to thank everyone who reached out and sent encouraging words to me after the recent post I put up about changes in my personal life and coming out of a dark and painful time. That really meant a lot to me. Thank you also to our supporters and patrons, the Warriors of Light, another source of encouragement to me personally. Thank you to our newest supporters, Graph Metal, Alana O'Neill, Nerd Side of Life, and Irish Tom. If you enjoy Magecast or The Well-Read Mage and want to help us improve them as we move towards self-hosting, you can support our concept at patreon.com/The Well-Read Mage. So this episode, I'm closing out our 3-part series on Chrono Trigger, a game which has a very special place in my life. It's been really incredible to be able to sit down and talk about my favorite game at such length, especially with the 3 guests that I've had. You can brush up on the previous episodes, Corridors of Rhyme with ABXY, and Trigger Warning with Retro Game Brews, by visiting thewellreadmage.com, Buzzsprout, or pretty much any podcatcher you can find. I do plan to get the episodes up on YouTube again, so please bear with me. For this tertiary episode, my guest is Chris from Overthinkery, aka the sometimes vaguely philosophical mage, aka British Chris. There are so many Chris's you gotta give them nicknames, you see. He is a blogger and philosopher, and an aspiring novelist. He just finished Chrono Trigger for the first time, so we discussed the nature of nostalgia and his first impressions of the game so far removed from its original era. Travel through time with us back to the 90s, or 3 days ago when Chris beat the game, and enjoy. Good morning, folks. Welcome to another episode of Magecast. Today I'm sitting down with Chris, Overthinker Wyatt. We have this discussion. I'm pretty sure I'm just going to say it's Overthinkery.
That's fine.
Okay, good. And then aka the sometimes vaguely philosophical mage. Lovely long mage name there.
It might be the longest.
You're tied.
I'm abbreviated on the mage chat.
Yeah. Oh, it just could not fit. There's another mage that's abbreviated on the Discord mage chat, which is the optimistically sentimental alabaster mage. Yeah.
Such a good name.
My goodness. That's a name where you have to copy and paste because I'm not going to type this out. So thanks for joining me from across the Atlantic, across country lines. This is pretty amazing that we're able to do this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, second time you've been on Magecast, right? What was
Indeed, yeah.
Oh, Kingdom Hearts, of course.
It was, yeah. It was episode 17 or something. No, it must have been further back than that.
It could have been. We'll have to look it up later.
One of those.
So, by way of just a little more continued introductions, what are you playing right now, and what are you plotting?
What am I plotting? Oh my goodness, that's a question.
And I know you left me a... Oh, by the way, thanks everybody who took the Magecast survey on SurveyMonkey. It's still open. I'm still looking for more feedback. Chris, thank you for taking the survey as well. Thanks for saying that you liked how I enunciate the T's in words.
It's so good.
Well, you know what? I had a frenulectomy when I was younger, where that's the thing under your tongue, like that webbing. So I had a speech impediment when I was a kid. So now I just try to overpronounce everything to distance myself from that younger version of myself.
It's very radio friendly.
Oh, well, thank you. How nice. Well, the over enunciation of T's. Anywho, yeah, go ahead. What are you playing and plotting right now? Plotting.
So I am currently playing Untitled Goose Game, which released yesterday, as of time of recording. It's great. I'm a goose. That's exactly what I wanted to be. And so I'm having a brilliant time. You are going to pick it up, aren't you, at some point? Because you wanted to do some coverage of it.
Yeah, just a first impressions post. That was a game I was looking forward to all year. At the start of the year, I don't know if you recall, we did a most anticipated games of 2019.
Yes.
And I was like, I don't know. And then I saw Entitled Goose Game, and I was like, that's it right there.
I think I must have said Kingdom Hearts 3 at the time, but
Yeah.
if you ask me, like pretty much any time since that came out, it's Untitled Goose Game all the way. And I realized maybe a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, that I didn't really know anything about the game. It was just that the developers had been absolutely sterling on social media. So well done them. Marketing campaign, very successful.
That's cool.
So I'm playing that. Also, the Overcooked 2 DLC that just came out, and Guacamelee 2 just picked up as well.
Nice.
And because I was a filthy heathen and played Chrono Trigger on my phone, and we might have to talk about that. Yeah.
Ouch.
Whoops. Yeah. So I decided that I needed another kind of, like, I was going to say serious game, you know what I mean, not casual, kind of on my phone. So I just picked up Hyperlight Drifter.
Oh, beautiful.
Which I've been meaning to play for ages.
Yeah, you're playing with my emotions all over the place right now. Like,
I'm sorry.
I'm just kidding. Hyperlight Drifter is a wonderful game. I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy it as well. What system did you pick it up on?
My phone.
Your phone. How dare you? Are you serious?
Sorry. Yeah. Well, it's.
I didn't even know they made a mobile version of it.
Yeah, no, it came out on iOS, which I know is kind of like in some ways disgusting and filthy, but it's actually quite convenient for me to be able to play games like that, like on the go sometimes, and like it meant that I got through Chrono Trigger probably quicker than if I'd done it on any other kind of thing. Yeah. There were some drawbacks, and we'll talk about that, but on the whole, actually, I think having things like RPGs available on your phone is really cool. I mean, I think Final Fantasy up to like number 9 is on iOS now.
Yep. Yeah, I'm not in the business of smashing people for playing on their phones. I think that's ridiculous. Like you said, you're a consumer. You find the product that's most convenient for you.
Yeah. And
that's what you did. That's the way it works for everything. So no shame there, no judging.
Nah.
It's just, it's the way it is. And I think, what is it? Well, it depends on what you say a gamer is. If a gamer is a person who infrequently or frequently plays video games at any point in time, then like what most gamers are mobile gamers. So it's just the way it is. So there's no console heathen. There's no PC master race. Thank goodness. It's just people like to play video games. However,
I kind of joke about it with myself in my head, like, you know, you're playing Chrono Trigger on a phone.
Yeah.
Like it seems weird, but at the same time, I am like, no, this is just how this is an accessible way of playing games these days, and it means I get to play this game kind of in a way that suits my lifestyle at the moment. So I think that's cool.
Right. Yeah, it's a little like powering a Tesla coil on a potato, but you know, you got to experience. That was a joke. You got to experience Chrono Trigger, you know, for yourself, and that's great. I would rather people experience Chrono Trigger than not. Let's just say that.
Yes. I know there are some version differences, and maybe we will cover some of that. I mean, I don't know what the version differences are because I've only played the one, but you might have some insight into that. But you asked what I was plotting as well.
Yes, plotting.
So this might be a good time to mention that this is obviously the Chrono Trigger sort of Holy Trinity episode. I mean, I've just apotheosized myself there, haven't I?
You're the Holy Ghost of guests. Just so you know.
Well, no, I think I'm the ghost of Chrono Trigger Future or something.
Oh, there you go. Oh, yeah. So explain your friend mentioned something interesting, right? About the 3 guests.
So I was talking to my friend Jono. Hello, if you're listening, he probably is. And sort of said about what the kind of concept for the 3 episodes was. And he pointed out that it was really appropriate in a game about time that we were having people who had played Chrono Trigger at 3 different points in time. So ABXY played it, I'm guessing, quite a long time ago.
I think contemporaneously, more or less.
Right,
so,
okay.
Right around 95.
And then I forget what episode 2 timeline was.
Yeah, episode 2 with Ryan from Retro Game Brews.
He had played it sort of not that long ago, right?
Yeah, more as an adult, something like 2 or 3 years ago, I think. And then there was yourself.
I finished it 3 days ago.
Wow. So that's amazing. And you know what I just realized too? If we would like to dispense with the religious imagery, we can. We've also got the three gurus of time, Melchior, Belthazar. It's still religious imagery because of the names.
I don't want to be mapped onto any of those. I feel like that's like my head will just swell beyond belief.
I'm gonna do it anyway. So you're that's kind of hard. Are you Gaspar or are you Belthazar? Or Belthazar?
I feel like just visually, I really like Gaspar's the guru of time, right?
Gaspar is the aren't they all the gurus of time? Gosh, I need to play this again.
Life,
like
reason,
you
and time.
just finished it, so you would know better than I would.
One of them's life and one of them's reason and one of them's time, and I can't remember which, but I'm assuming the dude at the end of time is probably
It's time,
and I think that's Gaspar.
Okay.
But I identify with him just because he looks kind of cool and he stands under a lamppost and doesn't really do much else, and I'm like, that sounds like a really good lifestyle.
Yeah.
So I'll be that guy.
Okay, so that's you, and it kind of makes sense because along the timeline you're in the most distant future, right? And then we would probably make Ryan Melchior, the weaponsmith.
Yeah.
And then because present just sounds fine. This doesn't work at all. But but
should we stop this now?
Yeah, that leaves ABXY with Belthazar.
But so the other important thing about the three of us is obviously ABXY hosts side quests very capably, which has just made a triumphant return. Actually, the episode that he came back with was really good.
Yes.
Focusing more on music and that kind of thing. Retro Game Brews is, I believe, launching soon a podcast.
Soon, yeah. It's still slightly under wraps. We didn't mention much about name or title. But soon.
I'm sure you said it was happening, though. I'm sure that's not a spoiler.
Yes. No, he did say there's a concept coming that we've been putting together. So lots of emphasis on stories and positivity.
Yeah. And I mean, that sounds great.
No, it does sound great. I posted on Reddit yesterday, and positivity is something that the internet definitely needs a little bit more of. Yeah. So, we're looking forward to that. And then
the long-awaited. Well, not really. So I think it was probably a good 6 or 7 months ago now. I had this idea for a sort of monthly column, maybe looking at games and specific bits of philosophy, but I wanted to be really kind of introductory, not academic, really, just kind of cover like the kind of stuff that you would learn if you did like a philosophy 101 sort of course, without getting too deep into it, but just kind of look, here's an idea, it's interesting, it relates to games, and that's really cool. And we kind of talked about it a bit and eventually decided maybe it would be fun to do an audio version of that. And so since then, we've been, I guess, in the pre-production stage of what we're calling Philosophiraga.
Yes.
Because it's philosophy and Phiraga is a spell. And I feel like I have to say that because I don't know if my pronunciation makes it obvious enough that that's like the thing.
See, and
but
that's
what
funny.
It is.
I think that you're probably the first mage to pronounce it besides myself. I'd just been saying Philosophiraga instead of Philosophiraga, but
yeah, when you say the spell though, do you say Phiraga or what do you say?
I say Phiroga. No, just
Phiroga.
kidding. I say Phiraga
because
it's fire. But yeah, I don't know. You could say Philosophiraga, or you could say Philosophiraga, or you could say Philosophiraga. That was one that rolled off my tongue every once in a while.
Philosophiraga.
Yeah. Whoo. It's a long name, but it's awesome.
The point is, it's about philosophy, and it's a burning flame of hot rod passion, and it's probably going to be really bite-sized as well. So, fire, quick. It fits, I think.
It's awesome.
But yeah, so that I've no idea when that will be kind of ready to go, but hopefully in the not too distant future there will be episodes of a new show talking about games and philosophy on the Magecast sort of family. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yes. We're expanding this. Yes. We like take off our clothes. Yes. So it's sort of like expanding this well-read mage family of podcasts, and that's really cool to me. There's a lot that I think we can do here. But so with Philosophiraga, this idea of each episode will kind of center around a single game and around a single or multiple ideas in philosophy, can get the word
in
out.
Podcasting. Yes,
in
we're talking about games and podcasting.
No,
I'm just doing reviews of Magecast episodes. That's my new concept.
You're like 10 out of 10. I liked it.
It was very good.
Yeah. So I definitely like that you hit on bite-sized, sort of manageable podcasts.
I'm thinking about 15 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, but something that is that's really tied to gaming, like you said, not too academic. Philosophy probably has the potential at its mere mention to scare some people away, but it doesn't need to be. So it'll be an interesting thing to kind of listen to this podcast, maybe learn a few new things, talk about games. It'll be great.
Yeah, it will be.
Yeah. So hopefully not too distant future on that. We're actually working on the logo, as I mentioned.
I'm so excited.
Yes, trying to evoke...
I have a logo.
You have a logo. It's just a picture of your face that we drew like a mustache on, and that's it. No, but trying to evoke the same, the Mage cast, the side quest logo, the sense of this sort of like swooping, lemniscate infinity sign. Anyways, so today we're going to talk about Chrono Trigger. Spoilers, I knew you saw that coming. Chrono Trigger. This is our third episode in a Chrono Trigger podcast trilogy. Probably if you went back in time and told my younger self that someday I would be able to do a Chrono Trigger podcast trilogy, I would have just exploded with excitement. This is
surely you would just have said, "What's a podcast?"
Yeah, well, that's true, huh? It depends on how far back you went. As I remained adolescent.
If you understood the concept, it would have been exciting.
Yeah, you've been like, it's a radio show. I would have been like, oh, okay, cool, like this. Yeah. But yeah, this is my favorite game of all time. Likely to stay that way. I put it in my 0th slot for favorite games, so it's likely to stay there for quite some time. But this episode is titled "It's About Time," because it is. It is about time. It's in yeah, you get the pun. I'm not gonna.
It's revelatory.
Yeah, no, it's great. So over the course of these 3 episodes, we kind of talked about different impressions and memories that people, myself and my 2 guests previous had for this game. The unusual thing now is that you don't really have these grand nostalgic memories for Chrono Trigger because, as you mentioned, you just finished it 3 days ago.
So yeah, I don't know exactly when I started playing it either, because I think we were kind of toying with the idea of having the 3 of us come on a Magecast episode specifically because of the whole podcast thing,
right?
And we were kind of thinking, what's a game that we can all talk about? And I think Chrono Trigger came up, and I said I haven't played it, but I'd kind of like to. And so it went from there. So I think I probably started playing it maybe a month ago.
Okay. And that sounds
Something
about
like
right
that.
to me. I think, yeah, month and a half at tops.
Well, I've got something like 35 hours playtime, something like that.
Okay. And you beat it once, correct? Like you played start to
Yes.
finish, completed all the side quests, and you went the Black Omen route?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I haven't done the post-game stuff, and I also haven't done the... I don't think I've done anything that wasn't in the original version, because I think it was the DS version that added some kind of dimensional vortex
That ties
stuff.
it to its sequel, yeah.
Yeah,
Which
and
I've not
also I
played
think
either, because I haven't played the
Oh.
DS version. So I know what it is.
as in you
I've
haven't- right,
watched
gotcha.
it. I've read about it, but I've not played it personally.
So basically, I did kind of the main storyline, you know, all the stuff up to getting Magus. Chrono dies. Spoilers. Chrono comes back.
And just again to clarify, every Magecast episode is a spoilers podcast because this game's like over 20 years old. So yeah.
Can you imagine trying to talk about it without mentioning that Chrono dies?
Could you imagine in an analytical podcast that's over an hour and a half long each episode, trying to avoid being like, and by the way, Lavos destroys the planet.
You'd have to say something else instead. You'd have to say, and then the beans grew or
Ooh,
something.
you
and
could
you'd be like,
start
people
using
will know what
code.
that means.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, Chrono dies. Chrono comes back. Then did all of the side quests stuff. I think, fairly sure. And then went through the Black Omen and beat Lavos, and everything was great.
Awesome. Cool. So that is the main route, pretty sure. And then there's obviously the new game plus content. You could start to beat Lavos at different points in time, at different points in the game. So this is great. This is kind of for science, right? No, it's like they really want to document your reactions and get them recorded.
Sure.
So that makes me really excited for this episode, because one of the things that you kind of consistently run into, I think uniquely in games, is people will dismiss in entirety a person's opinion on the basis of nostalgia. So essentially in saying, if you like that game, it's just nostalgia, especially if it's a game that's as old as this one.
But it's interesting because, of course, gaming is probably the newest art form.
Right, but it seems...
And so it's really interesting that you get that more, because I think maybe something like Citizen Kane is like the only other example I can think of, or perhaps like Paradise Lost or Dante or something. People saying, oh, or Shakespeare is quite a good example, actually. A lot of people think, oh, you just kind of say you like it because that's the sort of intellectual thing to do. That's
right.
The
and
hip thing to say, right?
That's the same and it's different at the same time, because what you're doing essentially is you're categorizing that person's opinion into a file that you've already put in the trash bin, right?
Yes.
So you've already sort of made up your mind. I think we're talking a priori, maybe. I don't know. I should have looked that up before I said it. But anywho, you're kind of having this predetermined bias before the conversation to dismiss.
Yeah, without experience.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay.
I say it differently than you, but it's the same thing.
Oh, how do you say it? Because you're British. And
I say a priori because I'm terrible.
Oh, I've always said
I don't think it is that,
but you know what? I grew up on a rock in the Pacific. I'm the one who's wrong. You grew up on an island.
A rock in the Atlantic.
In the Atlantic, yeah. We're brothers. Anywho,
yeah.
So, yeah, you kind of have this predetermined bias to say that, it's nostalgia. Or in the case of Shakespeare, to say, well, you're just saying it because, smart people say it. So that's it's a kind of dismissal of a category rather than taking a person's individual arguments and discussing those, which is, I think, what actual debate and actual conversation should be.
Well, it's kind of a weirdly specific form of ad hominem, isn't it? It's basically saying something to the effect of, I'm not going to listen to what you're actually saying. I'm going to discount it on the basis that I've made a judgment about your character, basically.
About the group that I perceive you belong to, about, a certain class in society, about a certain way of or method of thinking. So with Chrono Trigger then, that got off. I don't even remember what we're talking about.
I think we're talking about Chrono Trigger.
Oh, yeah, we are. So with Chrono Trigger, the reason why I want to kind of pull these thoughts out of you is because you do not have the nostalgic attachment. You don't even have the potential for that nostalgic attachment. You just played it 3 days ago. And I was going to remark, the interesting thing about video games is, like you mentioned Citizen Kane, but let's just say in terms of movies, you don't often hear people say, certainly not as frequently as in gaming, say if a person likes movies from the 60s or the 40s or the 50s or the 80s, you don't often hear critics say, well, you only like those films because they're nostalgic for you. Like if I was like, I love the movie Alien. I love the movie The Shining. I love the Planet of the Apes, the original. Like few people would probably be like, well, you only like them because they're nostalgic. They're not great films. There's no way to prove they're great films. They're just, you only like it because you saw them as a child. Yet that's a frequent argument in gaming. At least,
I'd be really surprised if in fact someone hasn't said almost those exact same things to someone about those films at some point. But I agree, it's definitely more visible, if nothing else, in gaming, and maybe that's just a side effect of the population of people who discuss things about games being people who tend to say things visibly on the internet.
Right. Right.
But it's definitely a phenomenon that you can see, right? You can see people saying, actually, this. I mean, oh gosh. Let's not talk about Kingdom Hearts, but the amount of kind of visible comments lately about Kingdom Hearts and people liking different games in the series because of X terrible reason is astonishing.
Right. Yeah. So maybe it's just a matter of, like you mentioned, gaming being a younger form of entertainment. And again, I don't think it's impossible that anybody has ever accused someone of liking something in film because of nostalgia. I think it has happened, but definitely in terms of the frequency. I like what you said there that with gaming, we sort of have a lot of discussion online. It's a younger art form. It's a younger form of entertainment, if you like. So maybe it's just a form in which conversation hasn't really developed kind of a standard yet, to kind of throw that question out there. Like if you think you have a random, you have a random.
It's going to be a big question. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not asking you. This is rhetorical because I don't think there's any way either of us could
Thank
answer.
goodness.
Yeah. Whew. But I suspect that it's quite possible that because gaming itself is young, as opposed to say music or film or literature, it hasn't developed a standard of conversation and critical conversation yet. Now there's people within it capable of having great critical conversations, but the average gaming conversation between strangers online is probably not up to par like it would be with average strangers discussing film. And not like just saying, oh, I like this movie, but discussing film. So anyway, that's a suspicion.
Do you know, I do have thoughts on that.
Go ahead.
Not really ones that...
Go ahead.
Well, I don't know. I think I don't kind of walk in the circles of discussion of things other than gaming as much.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know, and I don't think I disagree with you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's kind of, in some ways, a standard of conversation and of criticism developing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think perhaps, like I say, because for whatever reason, either just because I tend to see them more, or because there is actually something about people who play games that makes them more likely to be on the internet, we see a lot of people who are not attempting to meet that standard having those discussions. Whereas I think if you were to go onto a forum about, let's say Shakespeare, let's go back to that one.
Yeah.
I think probably most of the people having those discussions would have kind of immersed themselves in the criticism, and maybe I'm being overly like generous to Shakespeare fans and overly harsh on gaming fans.
I'm sure there are, jerks in Shakespeare fandom.
Oh my gosh, for sure, absolutely. There's someone who's like,
because here's the thought, right?
Sucks.
Is that gamers kind of get a bad rap, duly for some individuals, but not duly for other individuals, because people are individuals. They're not groups. They're not stereotypes. They're not something that you can't lump together every single person who's ever played video games or plays video games currently, frequently or infrequently, and say
absolutely.
that they have character similarities. Like, that's just impossible.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the people who are kind of entering those discussions are people who just kind of see them and think, I maybe have a thought about this and I'm going to kind of join it without necessarily recognizing what the kind of conventions of this conversation are, if they exist.
Yeah.
And like you say, maybe it's just that there are more long-standing kind of conventions of how you have conversations about music or whatever. And maybe, in a few years when someone has like kind of done like the Oxford Style Guide, but for games, everyone will be like, using the Oxford comma, and it'll be great.
Yeah.
And we'll all be like, aha, gaming discourse.
Yeah.
But I think maybe we're such a kind of diverse bunch, not that other fandoms aren't. Maybe we're such a diverse bunch who have access to a platform to give our opinions and want to do that, that we're just kind of, I don't know, we just kind of express things in a slightly less contiguous way. And that's not necessarily a bad thing all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah, I just think that if I were on a literature forum and I was like, I like Shakespeare's sonnet number 15.
Terrible, the worst.
Yeah, I don't think that people would pop out of nowhere and be like, kill yourself.
I
liked something. I mean, it's possible. Again, it's possible. But that's a huge subject to kind of discuss the state
about Chrono
of
Trigger?
the state of video game discussion. But we're talking about Chrono Trigger. So,
We're trying to.
We're trying to. So your opinion on Chrono Trigger though is interesting again because you're removed from that nostalgia. So there's a couple questions that I wanted to ask you to kind of get this ball rolling. The first one that I had written down is what prompted you to play Chrono Trigger, and you mentioned that was the discussion that we had, the four of us. As far
I think that was more of a like precipitating incident than kind of the thing that made me go from I'm never going to play Chrono Trigger to I'm going to play it right now. I think it was always one that I knew I was going to have to play at some point.
Yeah.
But it was just sort of like when do I, when do I go, now is the right time for Chrono Trigger?
Mm-hmm. So then what you would say, what interested you about Chrono Trigger prior to that conversation?
I don't really know. I think you always hear it held up as one of the great RPGs, one of the great games even. And it's kind of always in those discussions of what are the best games and what are the games that were the most innovative for the time. And also I think just the fact that you kind of don't shut up about it kind of put it on my radar a little bit.
Yeah,
I think if I hadn't been aware of it before, certainly hanging around with you made me think, oh no, this game sounds pretty cool.
Yeah. So along those lines, what are some expectations that you had going into it? Were you sort of skeptical? How did you feel coming into it? Did you think this can't be that good, or I'm preparing to have my mind blown?
I try not to do either of those things, because I find that both of them tend to end up being really unhelpful, although it's kind of impossible not to most of the time. But I think I was expecting that it would do things that I would go, yeah, these are really cool. Because a lot of people seem to agree on that. So I think I was expecting there's going to be a lot of stuff in here that I'm going to really like. I think I was probably just a little bit thinking, man, that red guy really likes this game. It can't possibly be that good. Just a little bit. But I think I kind of just went into it thinking something along the lines of, right, this is similar kind of time as Final Fantasy VI. I've played that, quite liked that. Let's see how it's different to other things that happened at the time, because I think that's an interesting question.
Definitely. So you did not have a Super Nintendo when you were a child, or did you? I'm going
to do the opposite of showing
a
my
little
age
too.
here.
Yeah, I beg your pardon. You're a little too young to have that, right?
I was born in 1994.
Okay.
So Chrono Trigger came out the year after that?
Yeah. So you were 1.
I was, yes, and little Babby Chris had other things on his mind than Chrono Trigger, sadly. So my first console kind of per se was a Game Boy Advance, and I eventually ended up getting a PlayStation 2. So that was my first home console.
Okay.
So I have never owned, other than kind of having occasionally dabbled in like pre-owned ones, I've never owned like a Super Nintendo or a Genesis or kind of anything before PlayStation 1 sort of era.
I gotcha. So it is actually then impossible for you to have nostalgia for Chrono Trigger. Considering
I should think so.
You just finished it for the first time, and considering you have zero attachment to sort of even its generation of consoles, and you didn't play them. You didn't play any of the sort of its peers contemporaneously, which is good. Different people should.
What would
be
you
able
say
to
are
enjoy.
its peers?
What's that?
Just what would you say its peers would be if you could pick some?
Yeah, so I would say like Super Nintendo. So you mentioned you played Final Fantasy VI.
Yeah.
But that's why I threw in contemporaneously. When did you play Final Fantasy VI?
About a year ago.
Yeah, so there you go. So you could potentially have, like a smidge of nostalgia from a year ago for Final Fantasy VI that might have melded into Chrono Trigger slightly, and therefore we can dismiss your entire opinion.
When was Pokemon Red?
When was Pokemon Red? 97, 96?
Something like that?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So I played that in like the very early 2000s, so that's probably about the closest I'm going to get to having played something from the mid-90s in the mid-90s.
Okay. And that's fairly close. So right now, my kid brother visited from Hawaii, and
yes,
yeah, he he surprised me. He spent the night over at my house, and we're kind of playing around, checking out different games. Played a lot of Smash, but he goes, "Can I play Chrono Trigger?"
He asked you.
He asked me. I started crying. No, I'm just kidding. But I was like, of course you can play Chrono Trigger. So I got to sit there for 2-3 hours. I did fall asleep at one point, but I woke up. Obviously, and the next day we played a little bit more Chrono Trigger. He got as far in 2 days as getting to the Masamune, and going off to fight Lavos or Magus. Beg your pardon.
Did you say did he play on the Super Nintendo?
He did, yes.
So the original version.
The original version, my favorite version, yeah. But again, I've never played the DS version. I haven't played the mobile version. Haven't played the Steam version. So the one
PS1?
version I've played. Oh, I have played PS1. You reminded me. I don't like it because it has horrible loading times. Yeah, we mentioned that on a previous episode. PS1 version, not a fan. But so we played the Super Nintendo version, and he loved it. He remarked that typically JRPGs, especially JRPGs from the 90s. So he was born in the year 2000. It's impossible for him to have nostalgia for the Super Nintendo or anything from the 90s because he was not a child when those were popular. His first console was, I think, PlayStation 2 or 3 even. I'm not quite sure. Depends on what I passed down to him. But anywho, he remarked that JRPGs, especially from the time, and he'd tried a couple, didn't hook him right away. Chrono Trigger did. He said it was interesting that you kind of start off at a fair and you start off just having fun. And rather than, this is really interesting how he was like, rather than it spending all this time giving you kind of exposition or world building or, these heavy cutscenes and introducing a large cast of characters, it's just, good morning, Chrono. You got to go to the fair today. And so you wake up and then, something bad happens. Marley gets thrown through time. And it starts right there. It doesn't need to be like, consider how much worse Chrono Trigger would be if you had to read entire Wikipedia pages of like the history of Guardia Kingdom or what the Millennial Fair was and the origins of the Millennial Fair and all, or like,
well, it would ruin it.
The schematics of Gato.
Discovering that for yourself
exactly.
is so good.
Yeah, and so the game doesn't have to have all of this information and exposition jammed into it in order to have a rich world. It's just fascinating to see the relationship between 600 AD Guardia and 1000 AD Guardia. So he quite enjoyed it. He's gonna keep finishing it, but that kind of adds to this experiment then of people playing Chrono Trigger for the first time as adults. He's 19 now. So I think that qualifies as an adult.
Well, I can tell you probably. So I started playing it and I was sort of thinking, this is better than like most games of this type, kind of in the opening. And the moment I was like, no, this game is great, was Chrono's Trial.
Oh yeah, and the game, because especially if you don't know what's coming.
I had no idea. So I knew a couple of things, right? I knew Chrono died because everyone knows Chrono died.
Okay.
And I knew that there was something called Lavos and I knew that you could recruit Magus if you didn't kill him.
Okay.
And those are about the 3 things that I knew about the plot.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But so at the beginning, I was like, yeah, fair. I'm going to take this guy's lunch and not get this girl her cat back. I tried to get her the cat back and he wouldn't come with me. So I don't think that was my fault. But like kind of just doing, the usual stuff that you would do. I'm like, cool, I'm starting out. I need potions and stuff. Let's go and raid some things.
Right.
So then the moment when you get to the trial and they're like, this guy tried to sell the pendant and he didn't go, he went to the pendant before he went to the princess and she wanted candy and he kept trying to drag her up and I was like, I did do those things.
Yeah, oh my God, I'm a monster. I watched my kid brother do those 2 things as well. Drag Marley away from the candy stand and grab the pendant before he talked to Marley. And I knew it was coming and when we hit the trial scene, he was like, what? What?
But you know what? It completely reframes how you think about it because up to that point, you're like, good JRPG, but kind of standard RPG tropes. But then you get to that point and you're like, what the game has just told me is that I cannot act as if this is a regular RPG and I can behave like I normally would.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's keeping track of these things. And I don't really know whether there's any other instance of kind of something little coming back to bite you, but it makes you think about everything you do from then on. You're like, I need to be good to people because someone's going to have a bad time if I don't.
Right. Imagine if there was another trial at the end of the game. Well, a couple thoughts on that is I think that builds up this theme of consequences to your actions that definitely play into the time and time paradox ideas that both Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross play around with. Another thing, as far as little things that you're being careful about, is you want to open treasure boxes in the most future time period first, and then backtrack through time and open them earlier and earlier, because obviously,
unless they're the sealed ones,
right? Yeah, because obviously, if you go back to, I mean, once you say it, it's obvious, but you don't think about that
But you wouldn't think it would bother to account for that.
Right, but they actually designed. It's fascinating, right? That they designed this
and
game
even stuff like
in such a way. So that if you opened a treasure chest in 65 million BC, it's not going to be there, in the distant future, which it makes sense, sure, but
I mean, and even things like I think it's the Sunstone quest, where you get the stone and you put it in a cave in 65 million BC, I think, and then you go to 2300 and it's not there, and someone took it in like 1000. So the solution is to go back to 1000 and make it so that they didn't take it, or that you put it back.
Right, and that was
point, and then you go back to 2300 and then it's there.
That was where
this makes so much sense.
Had to. Was that the one where you introduced charity to the guy's family by going to the Middle Ages?
You give his wife some beef jerky.
Yeah, and then when you come back to the
and
present,
that makes his whole family so much.
Yeah,
better.
well, it's like, and you think about that, though, it's super unethical, right? To manufacture an entire family's character just to suit your whim. Which again, in Chrono Cross, they kind of touch on the fact that these kids were kids. They didn't really know what they were doing. They were just like, yeah, of course, we're just going to mess around with the timeline in whatever way suits our fancy. But
I think it is interesting that kind of in a lot of kind of epic tales, and I think Chrono Trigger is like an epic tale in terms of themes and narrative and that kind of thing. A lot of them have this idea of destiny, or kind of the hero's journey as like this, there's the call and then he refuses the call and then he accepts, that whole thing. And there's the whole idea that there are things that are fixed and there are things that you are going to be destined to do or fated to do, and you're just going to kind of have to go along with that. And I think there are so many points in Chrono Trigger where that is shown not to be the case. Partly, obviously, with the fact that you can go to the future, and there is a timeline in which Lavos did actually just destroy like most of the stuff, and it's only choosing to act on that stops it. And by the way, who the heck would go, yeah, no, there's this giant thing however many years in the future, and I'm just gonna like get really good at hitting things with a sword, and then it'll be fine. But there's stuff about Frog as well, trying to kind of accept who he is, and I think there's something about the Masamune like being not really the thing, but it's the purpose that you use it for that makes it better or something. And Frog's like, well, I'm not good enough for that. I'm not destined to do that. And then he eventually just decides that he is.
Yeah. It's sort of like the it's not the wielding of the sword that matters, but why you wield it, right? So
yeah, it's the purpose.
It's kind of a game of ideals then. Because again, this is a couple of teenagers. They got one robot. They got one sword fighter who resembles a frog. They have the most powerful magic user in history, and then they have a cave woman. And it's like, are you guys really just gonna go up to this like world destroying entity and hit it with sticks and stones until it dies?
Yes, they are.
And
well, there's some kind of suggestion that there is kind of a higher power at work, right? There's this idea of the entity kind of directing them where they need to be, and I think when you get the Chrono Trigger, there is something that Gaspar says. I think it's Gaspar that gives it to you. He says something about you can only use it to restore someone who is like of critical importance to the timeline.
Right. So yeah.
So that's kind of Chrono needs to be there.
Right. So there's a sense in which Oh, I love this discussion. There's a sense in which the destiny and the ideals of these characters are significant to the timeline itself. So it's more than just, like, obviously the importance of the Masamune isn't just that it's a sword. It's the sword, right? And so the importance of these characters, the 7 characters that travel through time, aren't just that they're children, most of them, or that they're a robot or a frog or a cave woman or a sorcerer. It's that they're the 7 that the timeline needs in order to proceed in a certain direction. So yeah, it's this sense of predeterminism almost. I always wondered, thinking along these lines, why don't we have both a 2300 AD that's destroyed and a 2300 AD that's not destroyed? But I think that's probably asking too much of Chrono Trigger. And again, that's kind of something that they wrestle with in Cross.
So I have an idea about this, actually, weirdly, which is, so the entity that is guiding the players to where they need to be, I think there's a few interpretations of that, but one is that it's the player, because at the end there's something about the gates are closing because the entity's like, oh, I've done what I need to do here. And of course you as the player are like, well, I'm done now. And I forgot what the start of this sentence was already. Something to do with predeterminism and things. Oh, yes, why there aren't two 2300s. So I think if you follow the interpretation that the entity is the player and that the entity is kind of diverting things to make certain things happen or not happen, then the entity kind of has like a weird sort of temporal paradox immunity, and whichever timeline is the active one is basically just the one that the entity last brought into existence. Which does raise a lot of questions about what happened to all the other ones. And there is that question of, will Robo no longer come into existence because he only existed because Lavos destroyed stuff? Which kind of...
why does Robo not just like vaporize once you destroy Lavos, right?
Well, I mean, it's... Yeah, because Marley... I'm calling her Marley. In my head, she's Marl, but I'm calling her Marley because you do. You're welcome. She's the only person to actually disappear because of like a temporal change thing right near the beginning. No one else actually does that. They just sort of kind of carry on as if the thing had always happened. So when the Black Omen shows up, everyone's just like, oh, look, it's the Black Omen. That's been there for thousands of years. No change there.
Now, is it just possible, two things. Is it just possible that Robo would have always existed anyway? Rather, I mean, whether the world was destroyed or not, somebody would have built him. So that's a possibility.
Well... The FMV at the ending of, at least, and I know, so the Super Nintendo version didn't have the animated cutscenes, right?
It did not.
So the one that ends the entire game actually is weirdly expository, and like it feels really out of place because you kind of feel happy that things are over there, and then it kind of ties up a bunch of loose ends that I would have been like, I didn't need to know Chrono and Marley get married. Like I would have been fine leaving that.
Right.
And also, how come Frog's Glen again? But one of the things is Luca building like kind of what looks like a prototype Robo.
Yeah.
And so the implication there, I think, is she learned from Robo how to build the things that will eventually become Robo.
And you have that delicious time loop. Yep. Where it's, it's like, okay. So you create,
He's kind of his own proverbial grandfather.
Yeah. It's creating your own cause. Okay. So the idea of the entity being the player. Here's something that I wanted to bring up that just popped in my head. The entity purportedly, the characters theorize that the entity is the ones that is opening these gates and sort of allowing this progression through time, whereas previously they thought that it was Lavos that was the one causing all of these gates to happen. Lavos, as it turns out, is, again, just this mindless antagonist, doesn't really have as much purpose as they're investing into this theoretical entity. Now... one possible reason why I think it might not be the player is the very first time gate that you encounter at the Millennial Fair. Obviously, it can only open when you're there on that screen, when you bring Marley there. But it certainly had the potential to open without it, right? All that needed to happen was Marley needed to be there with the pendant in order for it to react with Luca's machine. That's what we're shown, at least. Maybe there's
I'm not saying I thought the theory through.
Right. I mean, but maybe there's no correlation between Going really off here.
Sure. I mean, I did have like a weird thought kind of towards the end of like, what about all those gates that are just chilling out? Like, can anyone just fall through them? And then I remembered you need the pendant. But for a bit, I was just thinking anyone could kind of go, oh, heck, where's this?
Well, you need the pendant, and then Luca also has her wand, right, that can open and close gates.
Yeah.
And then there's still the teleportation device, which you can use in New Game Plus to travel to Lavos. And there's no indication that it's the pendant sort of reacting. But all of those things being, is there a purely metaphysical explanation? And the player being metaphysical from the perspective of the game, right? Because the player is not in the game's physical universe digitally. But
I suppose, yeah, the player's kind of metatextual, right? If you take a game as being a text, as in a work of art that's been completed and published,
and the player is outside of that. But then once the entity becomes a theory within the game, then it's sort of welcoming the player, if that is the player, welcoming the player into the game in a character sense.
Which I would probably think was very strange if it weren't for the fact that Earthbound does it.
Yeah. And
I don't know how contemporary those two are to each other.
They're fairly close. I couldn't say how many years apart, but they're both on the Super Nintendo. They're both around the same era, mid-90s. I would really like to. This is one reason why I would really like to see a sequel for Chrono Trigger and kind of get more explanation on what this entity is, if it really is the player. I don't recall in Cross that they pick up on the idea, but they might have. It's been a little bit.
Do you know? It sounds like one of those questions that any answer would be less satisfying than not knowing.
Yes.
And that's another facet of nostalgia, really, isn't it? It's actually sometimes looking back on something is almost more rewarding than experiencing it as if anew, because sometimes you go back to something that you loved and it turns out not to be so good.
Exactly. Well, so we've kind of discussed your kind of first impressions about this game. Now that you've completed it, you've already kind of hinted at it. You've used terms great and amazing so far. But now that you've completed it, kind of what is your overall impression of Chrono Trigger? As someone without nostalgia.
I don't know if I remember saying amazing, but I think it is a really, really, really good game. And I stopped short of using the word great because I think there's like a specific meaning associated with that if I say it, you're going to be like quoting me like sometimes vaguely philosophical Mage agrees. It's a great game. No, do you know what? It is a great game. It is.
A great being one of those sort of amorphous terms that, any synonym that you would prefer to use would be fine by me.
It's quite wonderful. No, I think it is wonderful in that kind of almost sort of fairy tale-esque sense, in that there are wonders within it that will make you go wonder with an O, not with an A. That will kind of make you go like, oh my goodness, that's cool. But like in like a more transcendental sense than just that's cool. You know, it's not, hey, look, a really big sandwich, that's cool. It's like, hey, the Mona Lisa, that's cool.
Yeah, I gotcha. So in a sense, then, this game that's about time is timeless in a lot of ways. It's interesting to see people.
Did you have that one prepared?
I didn't. No, I was looking at the word time as I said it. But well, you've got people playing it for the first time now, and there's a lot of to do in discussion of games where people use the terms has it aged well, or the phrase rather, has it aged well, or it hasn't aged well, and so on and so forth. I'm just like, are we talking about wine? Like, what does it mean? I tried pulling this out of a couple people. What does it mean to age well? So like this is something we never say about other kinds of games, I don't think. Again, maybe not on a scale of any kind of measurable frequency, if we could throw back to a discussion from earlier. But when was the last...
I think maybe in films.
Right, we were talking about film, but now let's talk about like games, right? Because video games are sort of, can be compared to other kinds of games. They're both games. But when was the last time you heard somebody say of chess, it hasn't aged well, or it has aged well? It's kind of ridiculous, right, to think about. Or when was the last time you were at a rugby match? I don't know if you go to rugby matches, but
I know what. Yeah,
you know what they are. That's good. Or if somebody said of rugby, it hasn't aged very well as a game. That's kind of it sounds ridiculous, right? But that's how in some senses, especially if it's like a game from like 2010 or 2009, and somebody's like, it hasn't aged very well. I was like, what does that even mean? Like, has the game changed itself?
I think the reason it gets tossed around is because games, maybe more than other things, with the possible exception of film, are really tied up in people's minds with the technology that was used to present them. And so when you look back at something that was, Super Nintendo era, the technical capabilities are, I'm not going to say worse, but they are, I guess, less progressed than they are now.
They're limited in scope, right?
Yeah, and so I think people get confused sometimes between the technology is, to my mind, old now, and actually the work for the time was not good.
Right. Well, yeah, so there's that sense of it being tied to technology, and I think that's most presented in terms of a game's graphics. I tend to think that this sort of reveals that people most think of games in terms of their graphics than in any other feature. Because, I mean, we don't often talk about sort of the graphics or the aesthetics of chess, the presentation of chess. But if anybody discusses chess, so like I've been to chess tournaments. I used to play chess quasi-competitively with strangers and with people all the time. Try to get better and better and better at it. When you discuss chess, you discuss the mechanics. You discuss the plays. You discuss the strategy. You don't discuss, I really like this oak wood. I think that the oak wood is preferable to the glass chess set. Like, people just don't do that. But with games,
sure some people do.
Well, yeah. And again, in terms of frequency, I'm not saying it's impossible, but with games, though, obviously there's this much more significant visual element that's involved. And I'm not sort of dismissing that quality of games, that games are visual indeed, and visuals are an important part of a game. Certainly they welcome you into the game. Visuals have to have a certain utility to them in order to allow the player to experience the game itself, because they're not tangible. It's not like you could pick up, a chess piece in a game physically with your fingers. You have to actually see it and have another mechanism, the controller, in order to, put in your inputs. So I get that the visuals are an important aspect, but my only point here is that they are not the only aspect of games to consider. And so when somebody says this hasn't aged well, first I kind of want to get over this sense of, are they just referring to graphics? Because if that's the case, then yeah, it's pretty obvious. I mean, I hooked up my 2600 the other day, and it's an old system. It has old graphics. I could hardly kind of see what's going on. It was just very, very staticky. So, and that's a sense in which that has not particularly aged well, and that it doesn't display well, and so that the level of efficiency in the graphics goes down. But if we're talking about just in terms of, say, the Super Nintendo, or you played it on your phone, you can get a kind of crisp sense of visuals from that. And so you could discuss aesthetics of things and choices and limitations. But I think when somebody says, has it aged well, I want to challenge them in terms of gameplay and design. How have those things not aged well? And
I don't think that that's something that people don't. I think people, quite a lot of the time, at least as far as I can tell, are fairly good about specifying what they mean when they say something hasn't aged well. Mm-hmm. And you see certainly a lot of comments to that effect about the earlier Final Fantasy games, in particular mechanics that they had as opposed to the visuals.
Final Fantasy 1, perfect example, right? Spells
or
don't work. It just two with its development system, but choices that the characters made, 2, or errors that the developers made in 1, right? Those are things that were able to be improved over time. And so those are definitely things that you could say haven't aged well.
Yeah, I mean, saying that something hasn't aged well is really just comparing it to kind of your expectations of, if someone were to do the same thing today, how would it be better, I think? Mm-hmm. Or what lessons are now out there in the common consciousness that someone would have applied to this had it been done today. So obviously, if you were going to make the first Final Fantasy game today, you would probably do it with, all fancy graphics, and it would probably be a sort of 3D running around, kind of a bit like Final Fantasy 15, I suppose, visually.
Yeah, like an action RPG. Or you could go the indie route. This is kind of an interesting thing about modernity, right? Is you still have people making 8-bit and 16-bit games.
Sure, but I think they've learned from conventions that have basically been defined by, when we say that a game from the original 8-bit era has aged well in terms of mechanics, that means that those mechanics then kind of become ingrained as a convention when you're developing a game in that style.
Yes.
So you don't tend to copy the games that people say didn't age well mechanically. You kind of discard those because, we've learned the lessons from that. Let's not do that again.
Right. Well, you would think, right? Consistently.
I mean, you hope. Yeah. I'm not saying that's the case all the time, but
right. Now, and I'm sure you've played some indie. There's a lot of indie games that are sort of marketed as retro throwback. Pixel art games. That's how they try to get you with the nostalgia. And I've played some, like, say, Cosmic Star Heroine that we've done a podcast episode on, that had substance in its gameplay to support those retro throwback visuals. And so it was like, it makes sense to have these visuals in particular because it took the best things from the mechanics in that specific era and put them into this game. Whereas I've played some other pixel art games where I was like, this is like atrocious. It doesn't respond well. It doesn't work. There's glitches galore. There's all kinds of things that just get in the way of being able to experience this game. Like one of my least favorites is if the contrast is either way too high or way too low, and I can't see if I can't see what's happening in the game.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, whether it's way too much UI, just like over designed UI, or it's too minimal where I can't tell the difference between objects, then I cannot play your game. So yeah.
Just kind of for the sake of bringing it back to Chrono Trigger, maybe.
Yeah.
Let's maybe try and do that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, good idea.
So ABXY asked me what my favorite texts were, and I think texts as an element of Chrono Trigger that have aged well actually are worth touching on, because I don't know that I've come across a game that does like the same thing quite.
The only one that pops in my head right now is I Am Setsuna, which is a recent game, right? But it was specifically it was specifically modeled on Chrono Trigger. Like they said that. So then
I'm sure there must be games where you either have like a TP system and you can use magic or abilities. I mean, that's all over the place. And I'm sure there must be games as well where you can combine particular characters' abilities to achieve particular things. But I can't think of one that does it as deeply and is in such an interesting way as Chrono Trigger does.
Yeah. There's Breath of Fire 4. I think it was also from the 90s, maybe as late as 2000. Not sure off the top of my head. But Breath of Fire 4, you could basically, it was turn-based battles. You would have a character cast a spell first, like let's say fire. And then the next character, if they cast like a wind spell, it would create a Sirocco or, a flame tornado or something like that. So there's kind of this idea of the mixture. But as far as earlier than Chrono Trigger, because, that Chrono Trigger is the one that put that idea out there. If there was something earlier than Chrono Trigger, I don't know off the top of my head. So
in answer to the question as well, my favorite tech is Charm, because it's really useful.
Yeah.
My favorite double tech is probably Ice Water, because it's absolutely godly for clearing like everyone off the screen. Oh, or Falcon Strike, actually, also very useful for clearing lots of people off the screen. Triple tech, I actually don't think I've seen like anywhere near all the triple techs. I think I've seen all of the ones that involve Chrono, but the other ones that you have to equip a specific item for, I don't think I've used.
Yeah.
So the only one I can think of is like 3D attack, which is just kind of hitting something 3 times, and I was like, that doesn't seem worth being a triple, but whatever.
Yeah, there is definitely some interesting triples that, especially with Magus, that you kind of have to play the game, I think, longer than one playthrough in order to get it all.
Yeah.
Like Delta Storm, looking at here, a triple attack, there was one. I can't remember the names of all of these. But
I mean,
yeah,
they might have different names in the versions you played as well, actually, come to think of it.
perhaps. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. Looking at Omega Flare here. So just some of the ones that popped into my head were things like Chronos. I almost said Clouds. Chronos Luminaire.
Yeah, pretty good.
Really like that one. Magus, I think, had a one called Dark Matter. I think was
that's
really
so cool.
Yeah.
There's like there's the weird sort of vaguely almost like 2.5D shapes sort of shifting around on the screen and doing weird things.
Yeah.
And the first time I saw that, I was like, that's awesome.
It's really impressive, right? I mean, so the first time my kid brother traveled through time back to, the Middle Ages, and it shows you that intermediary scene where you're kind of traveling through this time warp, he was just like, wow. And
so was I.
Yeah, there's which is crazy because, again, this game is 20 years old more. It's an older game, but I think it's so well presented and it uses those effects so sparingly that and that's definitely
oh my gosh, yeah, if those were all over the place it would be just like a visual nightmare, but it's only every so often you're like, oh, this means something special's happening.
Yeah, it's a specific design choice that you can see how they could have really ruined the game. I mean, imagine if the whole thing looked like Star Fox. Not that Star Fox is a bad game, but it would have changed the entire presentation of this game. So like every once in a while when you do see sort of a spinning triangle, you're like, dude, that is a 3-dimensional
It's important.
object. Yeah. It definitely looks important.
Yeah. Speaking of presentation, I have a confession, and you're going to hate me.
No, I won't. I promise.
Like forever. You'll never forgive me. Believe me. So because I was playing on my phone, whenever I could, I had headphones in, but I didn't. Sometimes I played Chrono Trigger without the sound.
Oh, that's just no. I see. I don't hate you. I pity you.
Oh, thanks. That's even worse.
There's it's just great music. But now that you've played through it, you could always play through it again. This is true. There's different endings and such to pursue. But too, you could always listen to the sound. The soundtrack, excuse me.
Yeah, no, I've listened to the soundtrack like ad nauseum. But
that's wonderful.
I mean, I can listen to it and go, my goodness, these tracks are amazing. But it kind of, I'm expecting it probably lacks, some of the effect if it was where it's supposed to be, and if I was actually associating like character leitmotifs with them. So so here's a weird one, because I didn't always hear like characters' themes. I sometimes ended up making up my own. So
that is weird.
So I know that Robo's theme is supposed to sound like "Never Gonna Give You Up" by Rick Astley, right?
Yeah,
so if he ever showed up, that was what I heard.
Okay.
Frog had, I don't know whether this would have made it across the pond. There was like a kids show that had, it was a Jerry Anderson show, so it was these weird marionette puppets, and the show was called Thunderbirds, and it was about these these puppets who blasted off into space and did crazy things.
Yep.
But it had this really like kind of bombastic theme tune. It was like da 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 da, right?
Yeah, sort of like
and
stereotypical
every time
hero.
Frog shows up. So every time Frog shows up, I hear that. And then Ayla is just Eric Clapton's Layla.
Ayla, do.
Yes.
You got me on my knees. Oh yeah. So
yeah, all of that.
So you got Robo's right, but the last two are pretty different. So, yeah, that's a shame. There's, as long as you didn't miss, to me, sort of one of the great. Let's go back further. One of the great things about animation, right, is sort of Walt Disney connecting music to the visuals and sort of having like a character like Steamboat Willie whistle, and the effects of the visuals kind of playing along with the music. Now, so many decades later with Chrono Trigger, I think there's key moments in which the music and the revelation of a new track really heightens the effect of the game. So one really specific example is when you fight Magus in his castle. The first time I played it, I read through the dialogue without even thinking, but I read through the dialogue in perfect timing that the music kicked into this climax.
Oh, really?
Right when the dialogue ended and the screen scrolls up.
Cool.
Yeah, and you get this epic fight starts. And I was just blown away. I mean, I thought that's how it was, but obviously I played the game over again and breeze through the dialogue, and
it's
it didn't
so
quite
good
work
when
that
things
way.
work out like that as well, because you just wonder, like, did they plan it out? Did they actually work out how long it was going to take the average person to read this so that it would do that?
Yeah. Huh. Who knows?
Which is a really cool idea. Well,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think as well, I saw that if you fight Queen Zeal with Magus in your party, then it plays his theme instead of the battle theme,
Oh, I don't recall.
which would be really awesome if that is the case. I don't know, but yeah. Oh, speaking of Magus, ABXY says something else actually. He asked a really leading question, which I really liked, which was basically, other than Magus, because he's obviously the right answer, who was your favorite boss fight?
Who was yours?
Well, I'm trying to think about it now. The one that immediately springs to mind actually is oh gosh, what's the name of the queen of the reptiles? Azala?
Azalea, yeah, something like that.
So you fight her and this giant dinosaur
Heck
thingamabob.
yes. It was like
And
giant tyranno.
that thing is that thing is visually awesome.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But B, you do it with Lavos in the background.
He
you don't
falls
realize
from the
it?
sky, right? Right at that
like,
scene. Yeah.
immediately afterwards, he falls out of the sky. But if you look up during the battle, you can see like the red star falling.
Yeah.
And I noticed it, and I was like, oh, I guess the sun is like weird in this era or something.
Yeah.
And then you see it afterwards, and I was like, oh my god.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Also, I think the fact that Azala afterwards says something to the effect of, man, this sucks, but okay, cool, you beat me, you can kill me now. And Ayla's like, nah, you're all right. It's just the way things go.
Yeah, that's a great scene right there. I mean, you're fighting on this causeway in front of a giant dinosaur. Yeah, amazing. I think non-Magus fight.
Would Magus be your first choice then?
I don't know. That is a great battle. One that I believe it was Ryan brought up in the previous episode was fighting Ozzy, Slash, and Flea together.
Oh, I love them.
Yeah. And
because they use triple text.
And they start using triple text on you, and you're like, I thought I was the only one. So that's
right?
enjoyable. Fighting the dragon engine on the bridge in Guardia Castle when you're trying to escape
the one
from
that has
prison.
you can find the manual that says something like, hey guys, this tank is great, it's immune to everything except someone who would be stupid enough to hit it in the face with a sword.
Yeah, something like that. That's a great fight. Let me see what else we got here.
I think that was the first battle that required like kind of a degree of strategy beyond just kind of hitting it as hard as you can. There might have been another one before that, but I remember thinking that one was really cool.
The boss fight with Yakra in the cathedral is one where he'll counterattack if you kind of mess up attacking him at certain times. I think it has to do with his distance from your characters. But he almost wiped my brother out when he played him, and I just was like yelling at him. I was like, stop attacking, stop. Like he's going to murder you.
That is another really cool thing though. The distance, the fact that characters like move around on the field, and there are some texts that are specifically, if you use this will hit things in a line, for example, or things that are stood near to each other. And like, I did not know that was going to be the case. So it's kind of this weird hybrid of location being important, which in a turn-based battle it usually isn't, unless you have like full control of your movement, which you don't. So it's this weird kind of balance of there's not much I can do about the position, but I can take advantage of it when it comes up.
Yeah, exactly. Balance is a great word to describe Chrono Trigger. But I realized my favorite boss fight, and this is including Magus, my favorite boss fight is probably the fight against Masa and Mune. You have to fight them separately as sort of these elfin characters, and then you fight them when they fuse together. It is strange. I just love, there's something to me that's almost romantic in the classic sense of the word, where they're like, I'm the wind, or I'm going to become the wind. Against the concept of this game about ideals, but I think
it becomes a bit Arthurian, doesn't it? It's Masamune is basically the sword in the stone.
Oh, of course.
This can only be wielded by the person for the right purpose, etc.
And it's totally perfect for the Middle Ages too. And I like how each of these eras kind of pull from sort of like folkloric and common ideas about what these eras would be like in like a fantastical setting. But I think
the only thing I don't get about that is why the Masamune is like a Western broadsword, whereas Chrono has a katana.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Chrono was a weeaboo. Who knows? I don't know.
Seems plausible.
But when you fight Masamune, and they fuse together and form that gigantic muscular boss. I think that's the
terrifying.
first time in the game when you hear the second boss theme, that and so instead of just hearing the regular boss fight theme, it has this heightened level of hopefully you heard that boss theme when you were playing it. I don't know.
I did.
Oh, that's great.
But it's another one of those, like, this is different. It's being used sparingly, so I know this is important.
Exactly. Like the song that's going to open this podcast, my favorite, perhaps your favorite on the soundtrack, Corridors.
Is it Corridors of Time?
Yes, such a good song.
I think
and used
that
sparingly.
Secret of the Forest is probably my second favorite.
Secret of Forest is wonderful. Yeah, great.
Is that what it's called? Corridors of Time is definitely. It's so good. The sitar.
Yeah.
But yeah, Secret of the Forest. I really like that weird little effect that occasionally just goes, in the background. You know the one I mean?
Like a breathing. Yes.
It's so strange, but it really fits.
Yeah, it's such a wonderful soundtrack. So so we discussed some techs, kind of covering gameplay a little bit here. Discussed some bosses. Something that's really important to Chrono Trigger and sort of this balance between full-on action RPG, like we would think in our time, like Final Fantasy 15, something like that, where you have full control of characters and their movements and so on and so forth. And then the traditional turn-based combat, something that bridges that gap is the ATB system, right? The active time battle system. Now, Chrono Trigger is the second game, I believe, to use it, or third game, because you had it was invented in Final Fantasy 4, then used in Final Fantasy 6, and then used here in Chrono Trigger. It is, I think, one of Squaresoft's best inventions, and perhaps one of the best inventions in video games. It probably, you'd have to do a little research to demonstrate this, I'm sure, but it probably...
You do the research, I'm not doing it.
Well, I will, eventually. Let me retire first. It probably led to the rise of the action RPG as we know it today by introducing action and time-based elements into turn-based combat. It's hard to picture how we could have gotten here from, say, Final Fantasy 1 and 2 without the active time battle system. But the fact that you can turn on active and wait, right, where the enemy will wait for you while you're selecting menu items, or the enemy will just attack you ruthlessly if you're dinking around. For my brother, I was like, okay, before you start this game, let me see. And I grabbed the controller and put on the settings. And I put it on the second or third fastest battle pace. And then I put it on active. And I said,
oh, wow.
So now, because he's used to playing action games, right? He's a modern gamer. So I was like, so now, and I explained it to him, the enemies are just going to attack you ruthlessly. You have to be quick when you're selecting spells and items. And it destroyed him a couple times. He got a couple of game overs. Like most people get a game over their first time when they're fighting the Guardian and Bits in the 2300 AD. Yeah, it's an awful boss fight. But if you're not quick, if you don't know what you're doing, then yeah, it's just going to steamroll you. So
I did play on wait for the most part, purely because, and this is probably just a complete idiosyncrasy of the phone edition, trying to like find the right one and tap it without making a mistake is surprisingly hard.
Yeah, well, I can imagine.
So I would occasionally like not find the thing or press the wrong thing or whatever. So I ended up playing on wait just because I was like, if I go too fast, I'm just going to make mistakes and it's going to suck.
Yeah.
But it does balance it out by also, so enemies will wait for you, but also your own party members' time gauges will not fill up while you're selecting. So it doesn't make it unbalanced at all. There's a drawback to it.
Right, exactly.
Sometimes you have to like, you go to select something and you're like, oh heck, I want to do a double tech, but whoever's time bar isn't filled up yet. So you have to come back and wait for a second.
Mm-hmm. And it's such a great design choice on the part of the developers too, to give you the agency to choose between active and wait. They could have just made it an active game. They could have just made it a wait game, but instead they gave you the option to have both to suit your style of gameplay.
It is kind of deceptively simple, the whole ATB thing, but it's weirdly revolutionary at the same time. But
right.
I'm assuming that the answer to this is going to be no. Did the Super Nintendo version have a button that said auto and you could just press it and they would just do physical attacks?
No, it did not. Auto battle was in Breath of Fire 1, I think. So it's not a new concept. And I think Breath of Fire 1 predated Chrono Trigger by like 2 years or something like that, I think. But so yeah, auto battling. I mean, it would make the game easier. At least you don't have to sit there and tap A for like regular enemies. But there was not.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the only thing I used it for, because if you don't do something other than that for any boss, really, you're going to get yourself dead very quickly.
The bosses can be
I think
brutal. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Like Heckram, the guy that's on the cover of the game, that sort of weird blue hedgehoggy looking character. Oh, maybe it's a jab at Sonic. He would hit a counterattack mode where if you're just wailing on him, he will destroy you. Like he'll just tear you limb from limb. So you kind of really have to pay attention to the cues. But I beg your pardon. I think you were about to say something.
I have no idea. Probably.
Okay.
It's gone.
Well, I do have the next thing that I wanted to mention in terms of gameplay. What people really like about this game was you can see the enemies on the field and either avoid them or encounter them. In some cases, you can't avoid them. But it's a different sort of beast than the random encounters, right? Where you could just walk back and forth across a square. On this, you can actually see the monsters on the field. And not only that, but they interact with their environments frequently too, which I just thought was a wonderful thing about this game.
Yeah, I think the first, or one of the first things I noticed about that was you can, it's either in 1000 AD or 600, but it's in Truce Canyon, I think. There's like two imps just kicking a round fiend thing between themselves, like they're playing, like there's three fiends playing football.
Yeah.
And you're just like, excuse me, soccer.
Thank you.
and you just, I always walk past those guys because I'm like, it would be so easy to murder them, but I just like that they're having a good time, and I'm going to let them get on with it.
See, then that's lovely. I mean, they're not bothering anybody. They're just bullying a small animal.
But also, of course, used to great effect in Magus's castle when you're walking around and there are like creepy children and copies of people that you've met, and at first they don't attack you, but then after you get the save point, they then say creepy things and try and kill you.
Yeah, they do that in the cathedral a lot too, where you walk in and you're like, oh there's the king. And then you try and leave and he turns into a monster and you're like, oh darn it, you got me.
Yeah, I forgot about the cathedral. That really creeped me out when I first got to it.
Yeah, it's a creepy place. Another thing that my kid brother remarked on that I hadn't really thought about too much is how streamlined the game is in terms of its gameplay systems and its complexity. Like you mentioned just a few moments ago about the ATB system and how it is deceptively simple. It seems like it's simplistic, but it actually puts forth a lot of complexity in terms of battle gameplay. So with Chrono Trigger, you don't have all these different systems of having to collect world-building articles or having to have a whole separate sub-menu system for keeping track of different side quests and keeping track of different items, keeping track of all these different kinds of systems, your characters evolving, or having to collect this shiny version of this character and so on and so forth. You could just play this game, just move through it without having to worry about things like grinding, without having to worry about all that sort of thing. Yeah,
I think everything that's included is there for a reason and is important. And so it means, you don't have to grind, because that would kind of defeat the point of like, we're going to include that which needs to be included and that which is like relevant to the experience and the story. And I think stuff like not having a side quest menu, for example, I don't know whether that had been done at the time, so I don't know whether that would have been a new thing if they had done it, but I think that not having it just makes you feel like you're just kind of choosing to do these things because they're important rather than because there's some tick box that tells you that it would be good to.
Yes, exactly. Because at a certain point, you're playing the minimap. It's something I mentioned previously in some podcast, but in some games you find yourself looking at the minimap or looking at detective mode or looking at your radar more so than actually playing the full game itself on the full screen.
Yeah.
Because all you're doing is chasing down checkpoints. All you're doing is moving from lit up point A to lit up point B. In Chrono Trigger, there's not a whole lot of that. And first of all, and then two, there are more interesting things to do than just I've got to go from this checkpoint to this checkpoint and carry this item from here to there, or fetch this or fetch that for this NPC.
Fetch 20 bear butts. Yeah, I think there's some of the side quests kind of when you think about them feel a little bit like conceptually like they're fetch quests, but they're not, like, because of the relevance that they have to kind of other things that are going on.
Right.
So
to the character relevance, maybe felt, right?
Yeah. And I think maybe the one that felt the most like that for me was the Sunstone one, because I think that's the one where you meet like a dude in a... Oh no, I might be thinking of a different one. I was thinking of when you meet the carpenter in the bar and he's having a drink. He's a chrono swigger. He's swigging his drink. That's a pun that I just thought of, and it's really good. And now I regret not doing more of them. If only I had more chrono rigor and thought of more of them beforehand.
Rigor. Well done.
Rigor. Yeah, I said that with a lot of chrono vigor. This is the whole.
Yeah,
we're
just gonna do that. Yeah.
No, there's one where you meet a guy and he's swigging some beer and he's like, "Can you go get me?" Oh, he's the dude that says, "Go and get me my carpentry tools."
Right.
And you get them through some peculiar means, and that kind of conceptually sounds like a fetch quest, but then he uses them to repair something that lets you do something of significance.
Right. So, and there's the difference, right? In a regular fetch quest, it would have been like, "Go get me my tools."
He would give you some gold.
Right. Once you get the tools, then you get a reward, and that's it. And the reward would be something, like you said, gold, an item, a consumable.
The reward would be quantitative.
Right.
It would be here is like a number that I'm adding onto a variable.
Right. Not substantive in terms of continuing to develop these characters, continuing to world build or expand this universe. So,
well, it wouldn't really have been part of the character's experience, because I mean, if you think about, I suppose money is obviously part of a person's experience of living in the world, but stuff like if you get a stat bonus is kind of weirdly outside of the experience of what the characters are doing. So having the reward be something that they go and experience and do and that is important to them is, I think, much better.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, it's a great idea. And looking back over it, like I remember we were having a discussion of, have you finished everything in the game? Not that was a prerequisite for you appearing on this episode, but just to, see what you'd completed. And I kind of listed every side quest that I could find in the strategy guide, just as sort of a refresher. I looked at it and I was like, there's not a lot, it's not like the game's 6 or 7, the game's not overstuffed with stuff to do. And yet it seems like there's quite a lot to do in Chrono Trigger. It's still a shortish game, yet you can get a lot of gameplay out of it. So
yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, I've got something like 35 hours playtime from start to finish, and having done like all of the side quests bar the weird dimensional portal stuff, it didn't feel like that long, but I think at a lot of points I kind of realized, actually, I think I might be further in the story than I thought I was, because there's not that kind of padding of, you have to do this arbitrary thing before a man will move away from the bridge or whatever.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing is actually moving the plot forwards, which is like disappointingly unusual.
It's lean storytelling. It's not.
Yeah. And and there was a question which was from Games with Coffee, which was, what was the most enjoyable part of playing the game for the first time? And I think maybe just that. It's just the fact that it's not kind of overstuffed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he also asked, would you ever consider replaying it in the future?
He did, and I would want to kind of get some other endings and do the New Game Plus stuff, and that kind of thing. I don't know if I'll ever decide to just like kind of play it start to finish like as standard again. I'm not sure. I might do at some point. But again, it's just that weird thing of like, you have to kind of arbitrarily just decide at some point, oh, this is a good time for me to do that thing again, when like there's other stuff that seems more kind of immediate, but I definitely wouldn't discount playing it again for sure.
Games with Coffee tagged me and asked, would you consider the battle system to be perfect? If not, what would you add to make it so, if given the chance?
He doesn't say remove, just add.
He doesn't say remove, just add. So I think it's already, to use the term again, a lean combat system. I don't know what I would add. I would maybe add more meaningful triple techs, because it kind of is a lot of work to set up a triple tech. Sometimes, you kind of got to wait for everybody to be on task.
Yeah.
Scroll all the way to the bottom, select your triple tech. But maybe triple techs that instead of just doing a massive amount of damage would affect status of the characters.
Some sort of unique effect, yeah.
Something like that. Like maybe that you couldn't access. Or like it would be interesting if you had triple techs that say cost all your MP and increase the experience points at the end of the game, at the end of the combat. Or
my
something like that.
My thought when I read that question, just because I think of the word add, was I wonder how different it would be if you could either have like guest party members so that you had more than 3 people in at once, or if you could change party members during battle. And I thought in both cases that would probably be terrible.
Yeah. Well, you think, why 3? I actually remember first time I played this being disappointed that it was just 3 party members and not 4, or even in some cases 5. But I think having the 3 means that you have to be more on your toes. If somebody gets wounded or gets knocked out, then you're down to 2. So you really have to be kind of on your toes with this. Whereas it would certainly be easier if you had, 4 or 5 party members. You've got that many more hands.
Well, 3 is always kind of just on the edge of disaster, isn't it? Because 2 means that you can't have someone doing damage and healing.
Right.
Like without kind of potentially risking someone getting killed in the next move or 2. So 3 is like, you can sustain this, but you're going to be perpetually on the edge of like maybe dying.
So as cool as it would have been to see like quadruple or quintuple techs, I think that triple techs and 3 characters was a good design choice for this.
Yeah, I agree.
So this is from Execurus1 on Twitter, who stated and then asked, played over a dozen times, 50 if you count New Game Plus, ending farming. Well done. That's so impressive. That's amazing. In the last 24 years, and I always had a go-to group. Last playthrough, I went with a different group. It was great seeing new dialogues after all these years. Have you ever seen anything new in a recent playthrough? You have an easy answer to that.
Oh, all of it.
All of it. Everything.
All of it was new.
Yeah.
But that's a really interesting point about the characters having different dialogues, because I did notice that not all the time, but like not infrequently, someone would say something in a particular situation where I would be like, I don't know what another party member could have said that would have been remotely similar to that. Like that is so unique to that person in that situation. And I just really like that.
Well, now you've got something else to look forward to on another playthrough is different dialogue. That's true.
So how about you? New stuff?
Yeah, I've not completed the game 50 times, I don't think. I have farmed all the different endings. There are some that are absolutely worth it. The Dream Team ending where you get to meet the developers and sort of this kooky... like a Hironobu Sakaguchi sprite is in this game. And it looks like him. It's amazing. So definitely worth doing. Yeah, and there are other interesting endings that sort of like, again, what if you stopped playing the game at this point in time? How would that affect this timeline? How would that affect these characters? And these endings, a lot of them do address that. Some of them have only minor differences, but not all of them are very much, well, thanks for coming. Bye. See you later. And then you kind of wave bye to all your other party members who are from different timelines. So some of them really do add to the story in interesting ways. They're kind of like what ifs. That said, watching my brother play through it the first time, probably the biggest revelation for me was the whole leanness and streamlining of it. The lack of systems that they could have just layered on top of it over and over again. Like, say, a crafting system. Dude, what if Chrono Trigger had a crafting system where you had to collect items, and then late in the game you would have had to farm adamantoises for like 100 silver points, and then you would have had to fight and all this stuff. And so that adds complexity to the game, but in some ways more is not more is less. And you don't need... You don't need these things in order to make the game great.
That would have been, in the strictest sense, adding something to the game, but it would have absolutely taken away from the experience.
Right. What a contradiction that you can add something and it would take away from the experience.
Well, I mean, imagine drawing a mustache on the Mona Lisa.
Exactly. There you go. Well, then when there a Looney Tunes episode where Daffy Duck did that,
It seems like the sort of thing
it's
he would do.
diabolical, though. I mean, it ruins it. I mean, so obviously. This is another question from the ABXY Mage. So this is, what was your favorite game before you played Chrono Trigger for the first time?
I wonder if that's more directed at you than at me, because of course he knows that your favorite game is Chrono Trigger. If he's asking that to me, then the assumption is that Chrono Trigger is now my favorite game.
Yeah. So, because he knew it was my favorite game. But yeah, where do you stand on that? So what is your favorite game of all time? Kingdom Hearts 2.
Yeah. And I'm quite happy to admit that it's not the best game of all time, but it's my
game. Yeah. And that's a totally fine thing. Like we were discussing earlier, favoritism of a subject sometimes has nothing to do with the quality of the subject, right? Like,
well, and there is nostalgia there for me in the sense that it kind of came around, like both 1 and 2 came around at times in my life where they felt really cool and really big and meant something. And that's like really hard to kind of capture again by accident.
Yeah. Right. Which makes sense. I mean, Kingdom Hearts 2 was there for you at a specific time in your life. That's why for me, like, Chrono Trigger is not going to be dethroned. It marks a very specific time in my life when it was great escapism during my parents' divorce years. So it's not there. I can't play a game that's going to mean that much to me ever again. I don't think. So.
Sure. I mean, I'm not going to say that Kingdom Hearts 2 will never be dethroned for me, but it basically, a game would have to be really good in the kind of like objectively agreeable upon sense and the critical sense, and be really meaningful in a way that is almost completely arbitrary when you think about its actual the qualities of the game itself, which is maybe unfortunate and maybe not the right way to go about things, but I think it's unavoidable. Really.
So where would you rank Chrono Trigger then? Would it pop up in your top 10 now that you've completed it, or what do you think?
Probably, but that might just be recency bias.
Oh no. You've either got nostalgia bias or you've got recency bias. There's just no way to get around it.
This is a real cop out of an answer, but I don't ever think about stuff like that. I really don't. Okay. Like I've never really bothered to take the time to quantify what my favorite top however many games are.
Which is totally fair. So rather than quantifying it and giving it assigning a number or rank to it, would you just say that it's one of your favorite games? Or would you not?
Yes, I think I would.
Okay. For me, it is my favorite game. Before Chrono Trigger.
So what was your favorite game before that? Yeah.
Might have been... there's a couple possibilities. Might have been Mega Man X, Super Mario Brothers 3.
Oh, that's such a good game.
Depends on when I played all these. Yeah, it's a great game. Earthworm Jim, Breath of Fire 2. I'm not sure which of those I played before the others, so it's kind of hard for me to say one way or another. But those all appear on my top 10 now, more or less, I think. I think Breath of Fire 2 doesn't, but
sure.
Not quite sure. Anywho, so this question is from Triform Trinity, who asked, Chrono Trigger, Metal Gear Solid, and Tetris have a Mexican standoff. Who walks away triumphant? Chris.
What a question.
Question.
So the image that comes into my head when you say Mexican standoff is that the three of them have guns pointed at each other. And I can kind of only assume that Metal Gear Solid is the best at guns. Yes.
Is the best at guns,
so my answer is probably Metal Gear Solid, but maybe not for the reasons that Triform was guessing at.
Right. Tetris would be, comprised of inanimate blocks, so I imagine they probably...
one of the blocks is a little bit gun-shaped.
Well, yeah, but could they have the sentience to fire a gun despite being gun-shaped? So it kind of comes down to a group of people who can time travel, and then a guy who's this amazing kind of covert agent / assassin hero type. I think...
Yeah,
and then I asked the question earlier, can the Chrono Trigger crew just, like, time travel and, like, I don't know, do something ridiculous, like prevent guns from being invented or, prevent Snake from being born or something like that?
You say that, but I wouldn't be surprised if Kojima has some sort of like patch ready to go where like all of the Metal Gear Solid games suddenly update so that guns were never invented in that universe. Like it just seems like the kind of thing he would
What
do.
if Death Stranding is just the result of Chrono Trigger characters going back in time and meddling with the Metal Gear Solid timeline?
I can't even say I would be that surprised.
Yeah, you'd be like, of course it is. Of course, Kojima. All right, so here's the final question we're going to take. This is from Triform Trinity again, who said, when is nostalgia good or bad in video games? Can be when a critic reviewer is playing a game and ye old nostalgia lenses are not coming off. There's one thing I want to say real quick here. Nostalgia, good or bad? I think that nostalgia can be good or bad or neither, depending on the context. Nostalgia is great for personal enjoyment, and really, as we're consumers of these products. We enjoy the entertainment and the hobby of playing games. And for that, nostalgia on a personal level is a beautiful thing. It's wonderful. It kind of gets scoffed at a little bit when Nintendo's sometimes accused of just riding entirely on nostalgia. But if nostalgia is why you play the game and that makes you happy, then that's wonderful.
I mean, I think indubitably nostalgia is something that gives people more enjoyment of a thing, and that can't be a bad thing.
No. But now, so that's good. But if we're discussing, say, if we want to have a discussion about the merits, the intrinsic qualities, the design choices, sort of the things that we've touched on in this episode, if we want to say that it was really a good idea, objectively, to have 3 characters in combat in Chrono Trigger and not 18 at once...
that would be so hard to press the buttons on the phone. It'd be so small.
Right, exactly. So you can kind of see how, the one choice is better in the context of the game than the other. Now, you could never say that 3 characters is always better than 18 characters, because you might have a different game in which that's more appropriate. So the point being...
That's a good point as well, actually.
I
think the converse is also true, in that nostalgia can be a problem if someone is trying to judge something based on what it isn't when compared to something that they are nostalgic about. So if you're trying to judge every modern RPG by Chrono Trigger standards and you're going, well, this game doesn't have Robo in it. I like Robo, therefore this game sucks. Like, that's a problem.
That is a perfectly subjective, nostalgic argument. And one that you can't take away from somebody. They stated they like Robo, and there's nothing you can say that's going to change that.
It's not meaningless, and actually it's maybe an interesting thing for that person to say and not an invalid thing for them to say, but it's not necessarily a useful thing for them to say.
Exactly, because of the context of the conversation being judging the merits and quality of the game.
Yeah.
Okay, and somebody saying, I like the color blue, which is the color of the time travel, time warp thing, that's why I like Chrono Trigger. There's nothing you can say against that.
You like Luca's legs.
Right. Why'd you bring that up?
But you never mentioned Ayla, man. Like, you had a crush on Luca and you never had anything for Ayla? I don't believe that.
So now here's the truth has to come out in the 3rd Chrono Trigger episode. As a child, I thought Ayla was just too much. Fair out of my league. Like, drop dead gorgeous. Like, I'm just like, I would never have a chance with Ayla. But Luca seems like a kind of person that I could hang out with and have a conversation with. I mean, Ayla is beautiful, but you could not have a conversation with Ayla.
Oh, no.
No. Imagine having Ayla on this podcast. No. I'm never in.
I mean, yes, please do that.
Yeah.
Please.
Webcam off.
Get Ayla on this podcast. It'd be amazing.
Yeah. So I really like where this idea is going. I wrote down for nostalgia. So what is nostalgia? It comes from 2 Greek words, nostos, meaning to return home, and
which is from the Odyssey, right? Yeah.
Right, and then algos, pain. So it has to do with this painful homesickness or extreme or acute homesickness, and this idea of soldiers being away from home and just having a sense of nostalgia for their homeland. And so to put it in that context, you can't really say is nostalgia good or bad. It was just a feeling, right? And that sense of longing perhaps could have led to more morale, could have led to less morale, could have led to more fighting fervor or less.
I mean, I think even if you go back to the Odyssey, and do you know what? I knew this was going to come up, and I should have checked because I'm probably going to get this wrong. And
Should have reread
because
the
this is the
Odyssey,
internet,
darn
people
it.
will tell me it's wrong. I know, I really should have. But I think it's, if I remember right from college, one of the big themes of the Odyssey is Odysseus's will to get home. Basically, of course, that's the whole point. You know, he's trying to get home after the Trojan War, and his kind of urgency in that leads him to maybe make some bad decisions sometimes, but also his pain from the idea that he might not get home leads him to be, I guess, sensible in making sure that he actually does get home and that things don't go horribly wrong.
Yeah. So, the idea of nostalgia glasses. Now, how do you take off nostalgia glasses? How do you get around nostalgia?
Are you asking me, or is this just to the world?
Both. So, to phrase the question differently, you and I are video game critics, right?
Oh goodness, are we?
Oh, we are. Well, you write game reviews that are analytical and critical. That makes you a game critic.
I'll accept that.
Yeah, it's not in a professional sense. It's not something that we've attained these kind of titles. I don't like to think of those things as titles. Like, you're a writer if you write.
Yeah.
You're an author if you write a book. You're a philosopher if you like philosophy and talk about it. So, and those, again, not in a professional sense, but
it's descriptive.
Yeah, it's descriptive. So we are game critics in that we criticize games regularly. Criticize is a term that's gained a lot of sort of negativity. To criticize somebody is sort of to frown down on them and to look down on them. But to be critical in thinking about a game is really just to think about it as clearly as possible, and to sort of say what works and what doesn't work, more than just I liked this or I didn't like this. Now, those things can bridge and they can have overlap, or they don't have to. And I think that's an interesting thing then to ask about Chrono Trigger. What would you fix in Chrono Trigger? Is there any flaw in Chrono Trigger that you would fix?
Wow. There's just going to be like 5 minutes of me just thinking sounds.
Exhaling.
Well, I mean, fix is one of those words that assumes that something's broken.
Right. Right.
I suppose, is there anything I would change, I guess? Honestly, no. Because I can't conceive. The only changes I can conceive of would be, because I'm not a game designer, so I have no imagination in terms of how to design a game. But like, the only things I can conceive of are things that are kind of conventions within other games that have worked in those games. But I think about them and I'm like, that wouldn't work here. That would suck.
It's a hard question. I was thinking about it
might be
all
impossible.
week, and I don't think that our inability to answer the question means that the game is perfect. Let's get that out of the way. But it's remarkably difficult to find specific flaws in Chrono Trigger.
Yeah.
The one thing that I can think of...
More Gato.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. But is that based on personal preference or not? The one thing I can think
More
of...
Norstein Beckler.
...is... the one thing I can think of is when battles start, there is a slight freeze of frames. There's a slight gap between when you bump into a monster and then the music starts and the battle menu opens.
So your answer to what would you fix about Chrono Trigger is like 3 frames.
Well, okay. So here's why those frames are there, right? It's significant. It's not just like
Sure.
The problem being that with random encounters, when the screen goes black and it switches to the battle screen, that black screen is important. That's where the game hides all of its processing.
Yeah.
Right? In Chrono Trigger, you don't have that black screen. So that actually presented a difficulty for the designers. How do we make it so seamless? And they did a bang-up job because they were able to, still make it not debilitating as far as a freeze or a gap of time. But it is still there. So I think that maybe there was a way in the time to make that gap smaller, or maybe, in a future update of the game they were able to, but I don't think it's a huge
I didn't
issue.
notice it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It is there. It is a game freeze. It is, frame rate drop, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what the technical term it is for it. It is, but it is there.
I suppose it's just loading lag, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just a wee bit of loading lag on a Super Nintendo. So, you could say that that's an interruption to the gameplay and therefore a flaw in some sense, possibly, theoretically. But
I think if I did notice it, I probably internalized it as being everyone going, "Oh heck, better fight!"
Yeah,
and then
they should have put that exact sound bite over the top of the freeze. Oh heck, gotta fight! and then there you go.
As ever, your impression of me is impeccable.
You know what? I really tried, but that wasn't you at all. That was like somebody by the coast who was like, "Yeah, go fight now." I'm sorry. Let's see. So, okay. So we're not going to answer the question of how do you circumvent nostalgia? How do you get beyond nostalgia?
There might be a meaningful answer somewhere, but if there is, I look forward to someone eventually formulating it.
Yeah.
But it's going to take them a while.
Sort of like a textbook answer to this, I think is great.
Well, it will be a textbook. It'll be a whole one.
Yeah, because that's a huge question. But I think that I think it is possible to think critically about your favorite or your nostalgic titles. It's possible, like for me, what's a really nostalgic movie is like Terminator 2. I watched a lot when I was too young to watch that film, but I watched it a lot anyway. And I think it's a great movie, Terminator 2. Watching it through again, I can kind of pinpoint and pick out things that I don't think worked, or deliberate choices by the developer or the script writer that I think would have been maybe better in certain ways. So maybe it takes...
I think what you've hit on is that a big part of taking off those glasses is recognizing that you're wearing them and kind of just actively wanting to think about it in a different way.
Right.
I mean, that's maybe a really overly simple answer to a complex question, but I think just recognizing that bias is there and kind of consciously trying to address it is a good first step.
And then maybe it takes practice,
For
maybe
sure.
it takes practice to look at one of your favorite films. So one of my favorite films also is The Dark Crystal. Every time I watch it, I get lost in that movie.
Have you watched the next Netflix series?
No.
Are you going to?
I would, no, probably not.
Yeah.
Nah. Jim Henson is long gone, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, Dark Crystal, great film. I would have to force myself, if I wanted to, and there's a point coming to this as well. I would have to force myself to think critically about it. If I wanted to.
And would that make you enjoy it less?
Possibly. Or maybe it would help me to enjoy it more deeply in a different way.
Oh, who knows?
But the thing is that nobody should be required to think as critically as possible about everything.
Agreed.
People can if they enjoy it. Or people can play something or watch something and just get lost in it.
Yeah, I mean, I think really hard about a lot of stuff, but sometimes I just choose to kind of have a good time. Like, I'm a big fan of pro wrestling. I try not to think too hard about that.
Right. Yeah. So, and that's kind of a theme, I think, of this episode as we begin to wrap it up here is, you mentioned you played Chrono Trigger on mobile. That's fine. You're a consumer of the product. You consume it however is most convenient to you.
Yeah.
If you want to think deeply about something, deeply is kind of one of those that's like intellectual. But if you want to think critically about something, be critical of something, you can, if that gives you enjoyment, but you don't have to. And I don't think that we need to attach sort of the value of intellectualism to watching films or enjoying video games. We can if we want to. But we don't necessarily need to do that. And people can just enjoy things how they want to enjoy them. And I think that's for the best.
Yeah, enjoy it in a way that's right for you.
Close this out. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's about time that we wrap this up.
It's about time.
Title.
Huh?
You ever watch movies and they say the title and you're like, he said the title.
There's a Family Guy joke about that.
Oh, is
it's
there?
time to be Superman 4, The Quest for Peace.
Yeah, some of those titles are like, they're not going to say this title. Well, sir, thank you for capstoning the final episode in our Chrono Trigger trilogy.
Well, haven't we got Cross to look forward to?
We do.
Ooh.
Thank you. So next episode, we are entity willing. We are going to discuss. We're going to discuss Chrono Cross with the award-winning 16-bit dad. So look forward to that, please.
Do you know what I do? I've not played the game, and I'm still really excited to listen to that.
Well, mild spoilers, spoiler talk probably. So
fair enough. Do you know what you should do to just
What?
cap off the whole person who played it contemporaneously, person who played it not that long ago, person who played it like now? Get someone who's never played it on, and just talk to them about it, and just see what happens.
That would be interesting, huh? To do, I will experiment with that.
It could be interesting.
And I
It could
can
be
think
dead
of a
air.
couple people who've never played it before. But 16-bit dad is
great.
going to be an appropriate next guest. Not only is he wonderful, but Chrono Cross is his favorite over Chrono Trigger, which is unusual. So I look forward to discussing that with him. I got to refresh myself on the game just a wee bit.
And of course, the Radical Dreamers episode was shelved, lost in translation.
Yeah, I've never played it. Can't do it. So, well, thanks for being on, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's always fun.
Well, that's it for MageCast. The spell is wearing off. But stick around for a promo about another show I know you'd just love. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. If you liked it, please like, subscribe, and share this episode to help us reach a wider audience. If you enjoy our work, please consider supporting us and our vision for the future of civil gaming conversations with a monthly pledge of any amount at patreon.com/thewellreadmage. This episode may be over, but the legend will live on, passed down by the dwarves, the elves, and the dragons.
Hey, what's up, everyone? This is one of your hosts, Danny of Opinioneering. Now, when I say opinioneering, a lot of people don't know what I'm talking about. But what I mean is the word opinion and also engineering. So opinioneering is us going through life, giving our opinion about mostly nerd culture, pop culture things. Really, any type of culture. We get into a lot of tangents. But we like to delve in the realm of nerd culture and pop culture because that's what we grew up in. And now we are three nerd dads talking about the nerd culture here today and how we are moving forward and teaching our kids how to be nerds. And we go into real big depths about film, music, comic books, television. So join us on the Little Fellow Media Podcast Network today because we like having a lot of fun. And hopefully it's with you because we're just three nerd dad friends in and around our 30s sitting around a booze-filled table talking about nerd culture. So we want you to join in on the party. So come on down to Opinioneering and listen in. Thank you all. Again, join us on the Little Fellow Media Podcast Network.